The call lasted 9 seconds. 9 seconds for my son to destroy a man he'd spent 22 years believing in. I'm standing in my own driveway in Westfield, New Jersey, the keys still in my hand, the car engine still ticking, and my wife Marlene is on the porch steps with her arms crossed and that little smile she wears when she's about to take something away from me. My son Ethan is on the other end of the line. He's 22. He just flew in from Boston. I haven't seen him in 14 months. And the first words out of his mouth, before hello, before how was the flight, before I'm glad to see you Dad, are, is it true what Mom said about you? The phone slipped half an inch in my hand. I could feel the May air on my knuckles. I could hear the bag rolling in the trunk. I could see Marlene watching me from the steps like she was waiting for confirmation of something she'd already decided was true. I looked at the house I'd bought for her, the house she'd picked out herself on a Thursday in March 11 years ago, the house my name was on every single piece of paper for. And I said, into the phone, very quietly, "Come inside, son. I want to show you something." He hung up. He pulled his suitcase out of the trunk himself. He walked past me without looking at me. Marlene stood up from the steps. She reached out to hug him and he let her, but he didn't put his arms around her back. I noticed that. I notice everything now. I notice when a door doesn't close all the way. I notice when a thank you comes out flat. I notice when my own son walks past me like I'm a stranger in my own driveway. And then I followed them both inside, because I had spent a long time preparing for this exact walk, and I was not going to waste it on nerves. The hallway of our home is long. 23 feet of Brazilian walnut, a runner rug Marlene picked out from a shop in Soho, 3 framed photographs on the left wall. Ethan put his bag down. He stood in the hallway. Marlene asked him if he wanted water. He said no. He asked her, without turning around, where the kitchen was. Like he'd forgotten. He'd grown up in that kitchen. He'd done homework at that island. He'd carved his first pumpkin on that countertop. And he was asking where it was. I walked past them both. I didn't say a word. I went to the living room. I went to the wall above the fireplace. I stood underneath it. And then I said, into the silence of my own house, "Ethan. Come here. Look up." He came. He looked up. And I watched his face do something I will never forget as long as I live. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start at the beginning. My name is David Cole. I'm 51 years old. I run a commercial real estate firm in Midtown Manhattan that I built from nothing. The firm is called Cole Property Group. The firm's name is on a brass plaque outside a 62nd floor office on 6th Avenue. The firm has 41 employees. The firm's portfolio includes 8 buildings in 3 states. Last year, I signed a $4.2 million deal on a warehouse in Newark that I'm not going to bore you with, except to say that the number on that contract was larger than my father made in his entire life working at the post office in Trenton for 38 years. My father died at 63 of a heart attack in the break room of that post office. He was holding a letter he was about to sort. I found out 3 hours later because nobody had my mother's new number. I am telling you that not because I want you to feel sorry for me. I am telling you that so you understand the kind of head I carry. The kind of head where every dollar is a fingerprint. The kind of head where a handshake is a document. The kind of head that does not sit still. I am not a sentimental man. I never have been. I love my son. I love my wife. But I have never once in my life said the words "I love you" out loud in a way that felt easy. They have always felt like they cost me something. They have always felt like I was signing a check I couldn't cover. Marlene knew that when she married me. She knew it the night we met at a bar on the Upper West Side in October of 2003. She knew it at our wedding at the Plaza in 2005 when I gave a toast that lasted 45 seconds and didn't cry. She knew it on the night Ethan was born in 2002, and I stood in the hallway outside the delivery room with my hands in my pockets because I didn't know what to do with them. She knew it when I bought her first house at 31 with a check I wrote at the closing table, my hand not shaking, my voice not wavering. She knew it when I paid for her mother's funeral in 2017 with a wire transfer at 6 in the morning from a hotel room in Los Angeles because I was on a deal I couldn't walk away from. She knew exactly who she was marrying. And she married me anyway. I want you to hold that marriage in your head. The whole shape of it. Because what I'm about to tell you is the story of how my wife decided, very quietly, very carefully, over the course of 2.5 years, to teach my son that his father was a small man who wasn't worth the house he lived in. I didn't see it happening. That's the part that still wakes me up at 3 in the morning. I didn't see it. I was working. I was on deals. I was in Tokyo for a week in March of 2022. I was in Miami for a closing in July of 2022. I was in London for 10 days in November of 2022. I was in Los Angeles for 2 weeks in February of 2023. I came home. I kissed Marlene on the cheek. I asked about Ethan. She said he was fine. He was doing fine. He was at school. He was studying. He was applying to colleges. He was being a teenager. I believed her every single time, because I had spent 20 years of my life building a business, and a marriage, and a home, and the entire architecture of my life was held together by the assumption that the woman I had chosen was telling me the truth. She wasn't. Let me tell you what was actually happening while I was on those trips. While I was in Tokyo, Marlene was on the phone with her sister Gail for 4 hours. Gail is a difficult woman. Gail has been on antidepressants since 2014. Gail has been through 2 divorces. Gail has strong opinions about men that she has developed primarily by marrying the wrong ones. Gail told Marlene, and I'm quoting this from a text message I found on Marlene's iPad 3 months ago, "David doesn't see you. David sees his work. You raised that boy alone. You should make sure Ethan knows who was actually there." While I was in Miami, Marlene took Ethan to a therapist she had started seeing in February of 2022. The therapist's name was Dr. Felicia Harmon. Dr. Harmon billed us $420 a session and submitted the bills to our joint account. I paid them. I signed every check. I wrote family in the memo line. I never asked a single question. I trusted my wife. I should not have trusted my wife. While I was in London, Marlene started a separate savings account at a Chase branch 10 miles from our house. She put $4,000 into it in November. Then $6,000 in December. Then $8,000 in January. Then $9,000 in February. By the time I left for Los Angeles, the account had $31,000 in it. I didn't know about the account. I didn't know about the texts with Gail. I didn't know about Dr. Harmon. I didn't know that Marlene had been driving Ethan to Dr. Harmon twice a month since he was 16 years old. I didn't know that during those sessions, Marlene had been teaching our son a story about me. A specific story. A story with a beginning and a middle and an end. The beginning was, "Your father loves his work more than he loves you." The middle was, "Your father is emotionally unavailable and has been since you were a child." The end was, "Your father is not the man he pretends to be." Ethan believed all of it. He believed it because he was 16 and his mother was his mother. He believed it because, and I own this part, I was not as present as I should have been. I was on planes. I was on calls. I was in meetings. I missed his 16th birthday because I was in Singapore closing a deal that I later lost anyway. I missed his junior prom because I was in Dallas. I missed his high school graduation because I was on a flight to Frankfurt and didn't want to pay the change fee to come back. These are my failures. They are real failures. They are failures I will never be able to pay back. A child does not forget the chair his father was supposed to sit in. A child does not forget the graduation photo where his father is a stock image because nobody could reach him. A child does not forget. But what Marlene did with those failures was something else. What Marlene did was take my real failures, the things I had genuinely done wrong, and put them inside a story that pointed at a different man. A man who was a fraud. A man who was a coward. A man who had built his life on a lie. And she did this with the help of a therapist I was paying for, with the encouragement of a sister who had never liked me, with the patience of a woman who had been planning her exit for 2.5 years. She did this carefully. She did this with the same precision I used to put together a deal. She did this to win. The first time I saw what was happening was in August of 2023. Ethan was 17. He was supposed to come to dinner at our house on a Friday night. He cancelled. He said he had homework. I called him the next morning on a Saturday. He didn't pick up. He texted me back at 2 in the afternoon. The text said, "Can't talk now, Dad. Busy. Not I'll call you later. Not sorry. Just busy." A 17-year-old boy telling his father he was busy on a Saturday. I sat in my home office that morning. I looked at the wall. I looked at the photo of Ethan and me at his 10th birthday at a Yankees game. We were both wearing caps. He was sitting on my shoulders. He had my chin. I looked at that photo for 11 minutes. I counted. And then I went back to work. In September of 2023, Ethan applied to colleges. He didn't ask me for help with his essays. He didn't ask me to review his applications. He called Marlene and asked her what she thought about Boston University. Not me. Her. I was in the kitchen when he called. I heard him say, "Mom, what do you think about BU?" I stood at the counter. I didn't say anything. I let the question pass. I thought, this is her territory. He wants his mother. That's fine. That's the way it should be. I went back to my study. I closed the door. I sat at my desk. I didn't work for 2 hours. In October of 2023, Ethan got into Boston University. He told Marlene first. I was at the office. She called me at 4 in the afternoon and said, "Ethan got into BU." I said, "That's great. Tell him I want to take him to dinner." She said, "He's already gone to dinner with Gail." Gail. Her sister. The woman who had been telling her for 2 years that I was a fraud. I put the phone down. I didn't slam it. I placed it gently on the receiver. I went back to a contract I was reviewing. I signed it. The signature was steady. The signature was always steady. That was the problem. The signature was always steady because I had built a life where the signature never shook. The signature was a skill I had learned in my 20s to hide the fact that my father's hands shook when he signed anything. In December of 2023, 2 months before Ethan went to college, he called me on a Sunday afternoon. He called me. He volunteered to call me. I thought, this is good. This is him reaching out. He said, "Dad, can I ask you something?" I said yes. He said, "Mom told me that you make more money than most of the buildings you own are worth. Is that true?" I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Mom told me that you take money from the business and put it in your own account and call it yours." I stood in my kitchen. I held the phone with both hands. I said, very carefully, "Ethan, that is not true. I have never taken money from the business." He said, "Okay." He didn't argue. He didn't fight. He just said, "Okay." And then he said, "I love you, Dad." And he hung up. I sat down at the kitchen table. I did not move for 45 minutes. I looked at the mug Marlene had left on the counter. It was the mug from our honeymoon in Lisbon. I looked at the chair Ethan had sat in for breakfast every morning for 10 years. I looked at the calendar on the wall. There was a dentist appointment for him in March. I called Marlene's number. She picked up. I said, "Marlene, what are you telling Ethan about my business?" She said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Did you tell him that I take money from the business?" She said, "David, I don't know what you're talking about. I have never said that." Her voice was steady. Her voice was the same steady voice she had used at the closing table when we bought the first house. Her voice was the same steady voice she had used the night she told me she was pregnant with Ethan. Her voice was a professional voice. A voice of a woman who had been thinking about what she was going to say for a long time before she said it. I believed her. I believed her because I was an idiot. I believed her because I was the kind of man who believes his wife. I believed her because believing her was easier than the alternative. The alternative was that my wife was teaching my son to hate me. The alternative was that my son was going to go to college thinking his father was a thief. The alternative was a story I was not ready to hear. So I didn't hear it. I hung up the phone. I went back to my study. I closed the door. And I started, for the first time in my life, to plan something that was not a real estate deal. I started to plan how to save my son's mind. I didn't tell Marlene. I didn't tell Ethan. I didn't tell Gail. I didn't tell Dr. Harmon. The first thing I did was call a man I had worked with on a project in 2018, a private investigator named Roy Tendler. Roy is 64 years old. Roy has been a private investigator for 31 years. Roy was recommended to me by a lawyer friend who shall remain unnamed because he has since retired from law and moved to Portugal. Roy is not a flashy man. Roy drives a 2014 silver Toyota Camry with 214,000 miles on it. Roy charges $450 a day plus expenses. Roy is the kind of man who listens more than he talks. I like men who listen more than they talk. I have spent my life around men who don't. Roy met me at a diner off the New Jersey Turnpike on a Tuesday in January of 2024. I was wearing a gray coat and a blue tie because I had come from a meeting. He was wearing a brown jacket that had clearly been on the same hanger for 15 years. I told him what I needed. I told him I needed to know what my wife was telling my son. I told him I needed recordings if possible. I told him I would pay him whatever it cost. He looked at me across the table for a long time. The coffee was getting cold. He said, "Mr. Cole, are you sure?" I said yes. He said, "I'll need a retainer." I wrote him a check for $25,000 on the spot. He looked at the check. He said, "Why so much?" I said, "Because this is going to take a while." He folded the check into his pocket. He said, "It will." Roy worked for 11 weeks. 11 weeks of following Marlene to her appointments with Dr. Harmon. 11 weeks of sitting in a parked car outside the Chase branch in Millburn, New Jersey, where she had the secret account. 11 weeks of being in the parking lot of Gail's apartment complex in Montclair at odd hours when Marlene drove there. He did not take any shortcuts. He did not make anything up. He came back to me in late March of 2024 with a folder. The folder was brown. The folder had a rubber band around it. The folder had 230 pages in it. The folder had receipts. The folder had bank statements. The folder had transcripts. The folder had photographs. I took the folder from him at a coffee shop in the West Village on a Saturday morning. I carried it home in a leather briefcase I had owned since 2007. I put it on my desk. I locked the door. I didn't open it for 2 days. I opened it on a Tuesday evening after Marlene had gone to bed. I sat at my desk. I read the folder from page 1 to page 230. I read it slowly. I read it twice. Some of it I read out loud to the empty room because I needed to hear the words in my own voice. Some of it I had to put down and walk around my office for 10 minutes before I could come back to it. The first thing I learned was that the therapist, Dr. Harmon, was not a licensed clinical psychologist. She had a master's degree in counseling from a school in Vermont I had never heard of. She had been in practice for 9 years. She had been reported to the state licensing board twice for boundary issues. Once for telling a patient too much about her own divorce. Once for billing patients for sessions she did not conduct. Marlene did not know this. Marlene had found her on a website called BetterHelp something and had moved her to in-person sessions because Dr. Harmon had an office above a nail salon in West Orange. The second thing I learned was that Gail had been feeding Marlene a specific script. The script was in the transcripts. The script had lines like, "You have to put yourself first, Marlene. You have to teach that boy who really loves him." The script had lines like, "David doesn't deserve you. David doesn't deserve that house. David doesn't deserve that boy." Gail had been saying these things out loud to Marlene across a kitchen table in Montclair for 2.5 years. Gail had been giving Marlene courage. The third thing I learned was that Dr. Harmon had been keeping notes. The notes were detailed. They were written in a soft blue pen on yellow legal pads. The notes had dates. The notes had quotes from Ethan during therapy. The notes had things like, "Ethan says his father is never home. Ethan says his father doesn't hug him. Ethan says his father treats the business like a child." The notes also had things like, "Marlene reinforces these statements. Marlene offers no counter-narrative. Marlene appears to be shaping Ethan's perception of his father." I read that sentence 3 times. Marlene appears to be shaping Ethan's perception of his father. A therapist had written it down. A professional I was paying $420 a month to help my family had written, in her own handwriting, that my wife was shaping my son's perception of me. I closed the folder. I locked it in the safe in the back of my closet. I went downstairs. I poured myself a small glass of bourbon. I sat at the kitchen table. I did not drink the bourbon. I just looked at it. That was the night I decided I would not confront Marlene. I would not yell. I would not throw the folder at her. I would not file for divorce. Not yet. The goal was simple, I was going to wait until Ethan came home from college. I was going to show him the truth. Not the truth as I saw it. The truth as the documents saw it. The receipts. The bank statements. The transcripts. The therapist's own handwriting. I was going to lay them on a table in front of my son and I was going to let him read them himself. And then I was going to let him decide. I knew, when I made that decision, that there was a chance he wouldn't believe me. There was a chance he would take his mother's side. There was a chance he would walk out of my house and never come back. There was a chance he would call Gail. There was a chance Gail would call Dr. Harmon. I knew it because I am a man who reads contracts for a living. I read risk. I see risk before other people see risk. And the risk in front of me was, I might lose my son. I might lose my son forever. I might lose him to a woman I had slept next to for 21 years. But I also knew something else. I knew that I could not live the rest of my life as the man my wife was teaching my son I was. I could not die as that man. My father died as a man nobody remembered the right way. I was not going to die as a man my own son remembered wrong. So I waited. Spring of 2024. Ethan left for Boston University in late August. I drove him to the airport. It was me, Marlene, and Ethan in the car. I was driving because I always drive. Marlene was in the passenger seat with her sunglasses on. Ethan was in the back. Nobody talked for the first 20 minutes of the drive. Marlene made some small talk about packing. Ethan made some small talk about roommates. I made no talk at all. I drove the speed limit. I drove the way I always drive, a little under the limit, both hands on the wheel, eyes forward. The Newark airport signs came into view at the end of the road. I pulled into the drop-off lane. I put the car in park. I opened the trunk. Ethan's bags came out. I helped him get them on the curb. He stood there. He had a backpack on one shoulder and a suitcase in each hand. He looked at me. He did not say "I love you, Dad." He said, "I'll call when I land." I said, "Okay." He walked into the terminal. He did not turn around. I stood on the curb for 2 minutes. I watched him disappear. Marlene was still in the car. I got back in. I closed the trunk. I pulled out of the drop-off lane. I drove home. I drove the speed limit. Both hands on the wheel. Eyes forward. Marlene said, "On the highway, he's going to be fine." I said, "I know. I was not going to be fine. But I knew what I had to do." The next 9 months were the longest of my life. I worked. I closed deals. I signed contracts. I traveled. I did everything I had always done. But under all of it, working in parallel, was a different project. The project was a wall. Let me explain the wall. We have a fireplace in our living room. Above the fireplace, there was a wall. The wall was 12 feet wide and 9 feet tall. It was painted Benjamin Moore Decorator's white. It had been empty for the 11 years we had lived in the house. There was a small painting above the mantel, a view of the Hudson River I'd bought at an auction in 2014. Other than that painting, the wall was empty. Marlene had asked me, twice a year for 11 years, when I was going to put something on that wall. Each time, I had said, "Someday." Each time, she had rolled her eyes. I decided, in September of 2024, that someday was going to be the day Ethan came home from college. I called a man I knew from the Manhattan art world. His name is Armando Pelosi. Armando has been a framer for 32 years. He has framed 6 paintings that hang in the permanent collection at the Whitney. Armando came to the house on a Thursday morning in October. I told him what I wanted. I told him I wanted one large frame, custom-built, mahogany, museum-grade glass, no mat, no decoration. I told him the frame was going to hold a single document. I told him it had to be ready by May of 2025. Armando didn't ask me any questions. Armando quoted me $8,000. I wrote him a check that day. I started choosing the document. I went through the folder Roy had given me. I went through it page by page. I looked for the one document that could not be dismissed. The one document that could not be explained away by my wife. The one document that could not be reframed by Gail. The one document that could not be therapeuticized by Dr. Harmon. I needed a document whose meaning was airtight. I needed a document that could not be argued with by a 22-year-old boy who had been taught, by his own mother, that his father was a fraud. There were candidates. There was the transcript of Gail telling Marlene that she should teach that boy who really loves him. But a transcript could be challenged. There was the therapist's note. But the therapist would deny it. There were the bank statements showing the secret Chase account. But Marlene would say the account was her personal savings. There were the texts on Marlene's iPad. But texts could be deleted. There were the photographs of Marlene and Gail meeting in Montclair. But photographs could mean anything. The document I landed on was different. It was not a secret. It was public. It was not a transcript or a bank statement. It was not a note from a therapist. It was something else. It was something my wife had never known about. It was something my son had never known about. It was something I had never told anyone about, not Marlene, not my sister, not my closest friend. It was the one thing that could not be challenged because it was true, and because it was true, it was a wall. In November of 2024, I went to the office of my company, Cole Property Group. I took the elevator to the 62nd floor. I walked into my own office. I sat at my own desk. I opened a drawer I had not opened in almost a year. The drawer contained a folder. The folder contained a single sheet of paper. The paper was an announcement. The announcement was the official record of an event that had occurred on October 14, 2021, 4 years before this moment. The announcement was from the Board of Directors of Boston University. The announcement was about me. Let me explain what was on that sheet of paper. In 2019, I was approached by the chairman of the Real Estate Committee at Boston University. His name was Walter Chasen. Walter is a serious man in his 70s. Walter called me because BU was looking to expand its campus into a parcel of land in the Fenway neighborhood. Walter had heard about me from a developer in Connecticut I had worked with on a healthcare project. Walter flew to New York to meet me in February of 2019. He took me to lunch at the Four Seasons. He laid out the project. He said, "Mr. Cole, we need someone who is going to be quiet, efficient, and patient. We need someone who is going to acquire 17 parcels of land without making the university look bad. We need someone who is going to do this in 18 months. I took the job. I took the job for free. I didn't say a word about the fee for the first 6 months of conversations. Walter brought it up at our third meeting. I said, "There is no fee." Walter looked at me. He said, "Mr. Cole, this is a project worth $42 million. I said, "There is no fee." Walter said, "Why?" I said, "Because my son might go to this school someday. And I would like his school to have a better campus." Walter stared at me across the table for a long time. The coffee was getting cold. Walter said, "You understand this is very unusual." I said yes. Walter said the board would need a formal record. I said I'd prepare one. The project took 26 months. 2 years and 2 months. We acquired 17 parcels of land. We did it quietly. We did it without lawsuits. We did it with 100% of the parcels transferred to the university's name by October of 2021. On October 14, 2021, the Board of Directors at Boston University passed a resolution. The resolution was recorded. The resolution is on a single sheet of paper in my desk drawer. The resolution includes a paragraph. The paragraph reads, "The Board of Directors of Boston University hereby commends David Cole for his extraordinary service to the university in completing the Fenway expansion project on time and under budget, and for providing his services without fee or compensation, in recognition of his dedication to the future students of this institution." The resolution was framed inside my mind. The resolution was signed by the chairman of the board, by the president of the university, by the dean of the College of Arts and Sciences, and by the chair of the Real Estate Committee. The resolution was filed in the public record of the university. The resolution is real. The resolution is provable. Marlene did not know about the project. Marlene did not know I had worked for BU for free. Marlene did not know because I had not told her. Marlene did not know because Marlene did not know everything about me. Marlene never had. Marlene knew the shape of my life. Marlene knew the brand of my suits. Marlene knew the names of my clients. Marlene knew the schools my son was applying to. Marlene knew where we took vacations. Marlene knew what I had for breakfast. But Marlene did not know what I did at my desk on a Tuesday afternoon in October of 2021. Marlene did not know because I had decided, very early in our marriage, that some things are mine. Some things are kept. Some things are held. Some things a man keeps not because he is hiding them from his wife but because they are part of the quiet architecture of being a person. The parts that no one else sees. The parts that make the rest make sense. I was not hiding this from Marlene because I was afraid. I was not hiding this because I wanted credit. I was hiding this because I had done it for Ethan. I had done it for the possibility of Ethan. I had done it because the thought of my son walking onto a campus I had built was something I wanted to be true, and I wanted it to be true quietly, the way most things that matter are true quietly. And then the announcement came. Ethan got into BU. He told Marlene first. Not me. I stood at the kitchen counter and heard him say, "Mom, what do you think about BU?" And I said nothing. I went back to my study. I closed the door. Because I knew the truth. I knew that BU was the school I'd quietly worked for 2 years to expand. I knew that my son's school, the campus he would walk on, the buildings he would study in, the library he would sit in at midnight, the dorm room he would live in for 4 years, was a campus I had quietly, carefully, for free, helped his university build. I didn't tell him. I didn't tell him because it was time to wait. I didn't tell him because telling him the truth up front was not going to teach him anything. The truth, told too soon, is just words. The truth, held in my hand for 14 months, was a wall. I took the document out of the drawer. I walked out of the office with it. I took it home. I handed it to Armando. I said, "Frame this. Do not laminate it. Do not cut it. Use museum-grade glass. Use mahogany. Make the frame wider than the document so the document floats. I want the document to look like it is on air. I want the document to look like it is the only thing in the room." Armando took the paper from my hands. He looked at it. He said, "Mr. Cole, what is this?" I said, "This is the truth." He said, "Okay." He didn't ask any more questions. The frame was delivered to my house in early May of 2025. The frame was mahogany. The frame was 48 inches wide by 36 inches tall. The frame was a serious frame. The frame was the kind of frame you see in a courtroom behind the judge. The frame didn't belong in a living room. The frame belonged above a fireplace. Armando helped me install it. We hung it above the mantel where the small Hudson River painting had been. The painting went into a closet. The frame went onto the wall. The document floated inside it. The paragraph read, "The Board of Directors of Boston University hereby commends David Cole." The names were signed at the bottom. The university seal was at the top right. The wall was no longer empty. The wall had the truth on it. I walked downstairs after Armando left. I stood in the living room. I looked at it. I didn't tell Marlene where I'd been that afternoon. I didn't tell her why Armando had been at the house. I told her I'd sold the painting because I was tired of it. She said, "What did you replace it with?" I said, "You'll see it eventually." She said, "David, what does that mean?" I said, "It means you'll see it eventually." I didn't tell her what was on the wall. I didn't tell her because telling her would have given her the chance to dismantle it. Telling her would have given her the chance to call Gail. Telling her would have given her the chance to call Dr. Harmon. Telling her would have given her the chance to prepare an answer. The truth, told the wrong way, gives the listener time to build a wall around it. The truth, held at arm's length until the right moment, has nowhere to land. I was going to give my son the truth in front of the truth. I was going to give him the document in the room with the document. I was going to let him read the paragraph. I was going to let him read the signatures. I was going to let him stand in the same room as the framed announcement. I was going to let him come to the conclusion himself. I was not going to argue with him. I was not going to shout. I was not going to throw anything. I was going to let the wall speak. April of 2025. Ethan told Marlene he was coming home for Memorial Day weekend. Marlene told me. I said I'd be there. I said I'd take him to dinner. She said, "He's going to want to see his friends." I said, "That's fine. We'll have dinner Sunday." She booked a reservation at a steakhouse in Short Hills. I didn't argue. I didn't push for more time. I didn't say, "I need to see him alone." I didn't say, "I need to have a serious conversation with my son." I just said, "That's fine. Dinner Sunday." I made one call. I called Roy. I told Roy the date. I told Roy I didn't need him to come to the house. I just needed him to be on standby in case Marlene tried to escalate. Roy said he'd be available. I asked him how much I owed him in total. He told me the final figure was $42,000. I told him I'd send it that afternoon. He said, "Mr. Cole, are you okay?" I said, "Roy, I'm the most okay I have ever been." May of 2025. Ethan flew into Newark on a Friday afternoon. I went to pick him up. Marlene wanted to come. I said, "Let me go alone. He'll want some one-on-one time with his dad." She said, "Okay." She didn't push. She didn't argue. She was, I think, confident that the script she had been writing for 2.5 years was holding. She was confident that when Ethan stepped out of the airport and saw me, he would treat me the way the script said he should treat me. Distant. Polite. Short. I parked at the pickup lane. I waited 11 minutes. I saw him come out. He was taller than I remembered. His shoulders were wider. He had a beard. He was carrying a backpack over one shoulder and rolling a black suitcase with the other hand. He saw me. He walked over. He did not hug me. He put his suitcase in the trunk himself. He got into the passenger seat. He said, "Hey, Dad." I said, "Hey, Ethan." He buckled his seatbelt. I pulled out of the lane. I drove onto the highway. He didn't say anything for 10 minutes. I didn't say anything for 10 minutes. The radio was off. The road was empty. I was driving the speed limit. Both hands on the wheel. Eyes forward. The way I always drive. After 10 minutes he said, "How's Mom?" I said, "She's good. She's excited to see you." He said, "Yeah." After another 5 minutes he said, "How's the business?" I said, "Still standing." He said, "Good." After another minute he said, "Listen, Dad. There's something I need to tell you." I said, "Okay." He said, "Mom told me some things about you. Some things I think you should know she told me." I said, "Okay." He said, "She told me that you took money from the company that wasn't yours." I said, "Okay." He said, "She told me that you don't really love us. You love the work." I said, "Okay." He said, "She told me that you paid her to stay." I said, "Okay." He said, "I didn't believe all of it. But I believed some of it. I wanted to tell you that. I wanted to tell you in person." I drove for another 2 minutes. I didn't say a word. Then I said, "Ethan, when we get home, I want you to look at the wall in the living room. I want you to read it. I want you to read every word of it out loud if you want to. Then I want you to ask me anything you want." He said, "Okay." He said, "Okay, Dad." I drove the rest of the way home in silence. I did not defend myself. I did not argue. I did not say a single word in my own defense. I had been practicing this restraint for 14 months. I had been waiting for exactly this drive. I had trained myself not to speak. Not because I didn't have words, but because the words would come out of me like fire, and fire would give him a reason to leave before he had seen the wall. We pulled into the driveway. Marlene was on the porch. I had told her I'd be back around 4. I was back at 3:45. She came down the steps. She hugged Ethan. He hugged her back. He picked up his suitcase from the trunk. She carried his backpack. They walked into the house. I stood in the driveway for 1 minute. My hands were on the wheel. My hands were shaking for the first time in 20 years. I unclenched them. I got out. I followed them inside. The first hour was normal. Small talk. College stories. New roommate complaints. A story about an economics professor. A story about a girl in his dorm who played cello at midnight. Marlene made iced tea. I sat at the kitchen island. I listened. I asked small questions. I asked about his classes. I asked about his friends. I didn't push. I gave him a normal hour. I gave him the hour his mother had trained him to expect from his father, distant, polite, brief. I gave him the hour she wanted him to see so that the other hour, the hour after, would land harder. At 5 o'clock, Marlene said she was going to run out for groceries. She said she'd be back in an hour. She said she was planning to cook dinner for him that night, his favorite, lemon chicken. She asked Ethan if he wanted anything specific. He said, "Mom, whatever you want is fine." She kissed his forehead. She picked up her keys. She drove away. The house was empty except for me and my son. Ethan's back was to the living room. He was sitting in the kitchen chair at the island. He was scrolling on his phone. I said, "Ethan, come into the living room for a second." He said, "Now." I said, "Now." He stood up. He followed me. I walked into the living room. I stood in the middle of the room. I pointed at the wall. He looked up. He read the document from the top down. He read it slowly. He read it once. He read it twice. He walked closer to it. He stood in front of it. He read it a third time. He turned around. He looked at me. His face was white. His jaw was tight. His hands were at his sides. I said, "Ethan, that's a public document. It's on file at Boston University. You can verify it. The signatures are real. The seal is real. The resolution is real. That wall is real. I built that wall 5 weeks ago. I built it because I wanted you to see it. I built it because I wanted you to know that I worked for your school for free. I built it because I wanted you to know that the man your mother told you about is not the man on that wall." He turned back to the wall. He read it a fourth time. He put his hand up to the glass. He touched the university seal with his fingertip. He said, very quietly, "Mom told me you took money from the company." I said, "I have never taken $1 from that company that wasn't mine. I have never taken $1 from that company that wasn't on my tax return. I have never taken $1 from that company that wasn't already in a joint account that you and your mother have access to. I have never taken $1 that wasn't reported to the IRS down to the last cent." He said, "Mom told me you paid her to stay." I said, "I have never paid your mother $1. I have never written your mother a check. I have never wired your mother money. Every dollar that has ever been wired into our household has gone through our joint account. Every dollar that has ever been withdrawn has been on a statement that your mother could audit. There is no payment. There has never been a payment." He said, "Mom told me you don't love us." I said, "Ethan, I have loved you every single day of your life. I have not always been present. That is my failure. That is real. That is something I will never be able to fix. But loving you and being present are different things. I have loved you from planes. I have loved you from Tokyo. I have loved you from London. I have loved you from Los Angeles. I have loved you from the kitchen counter on a Sunday morning when you were 10 and you asked me to teach you how to tie your shoes and I taught you and I didn't tell you that I was wearing the same shoes my father had worn at his wedding. I have loved you quietly. I have loved you in ways that don't show up on a phone. I have loved you in ways that don't show up on a stage at a graduation. I have loved you in ways that show up on a wall above a fireplace in a house I bought for you." He was quiet for 30 seconds. He didn't move. He didn't look away from the wall. He said, "Did you really do this for free?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Why?" I said, "Because I wanted to be your father. I wanted to be your father in a way that was so quiet it didn't even have a name. I wanted to be your father in a way that didn't need a thank you. I wanted to be your father in a way that required no audience. I wanted to be your father in a way that only becomes visible if you go looking for it. I am not good at telling you I love you out loud. I am not good at it. I have never been good at it. My father was not good at it. His father was not good at it. We are a family of men who love in the dark and hope the light finds it. He turned away from the wall. He sat down on the couch. He put his elbows on his knees. He put his head in his hands. He sat like that for 2 minutes. I didn't sit down. I stood in the middle of the room. I let him think. I let the wall do its work. I let the truth do its work. I didn't move. I didn't prompt him. I didn't say, "Are you okay?" Because I knew he wasn't okay. I knew he was not okay. He was a 22-year-old boy whose mother had told him a lie about his father, and the lie had just evaporated in front of a university seal at 3 o'clock on a Friday afternoon. After 2 minutes, he stood up. He walked to the wall. He took out his phone. He took a photo of the document. He took a second photo. He took a third photo. He said, "I'm going to verify this." I said, "Good." He said, "I'm going to call the board." I said, "Good." He said, "I'm going to call Walter Chasen." I said, "Walter is retired. He's in Florida. His number is in the public record." He said, "I'm going to call him." I said, "Good." He called. He called Walter Chasen. I watched him dial. I watched him put the phone to his ear. I watched him wait. I watched a man answer. I watched Ethan's face change 3 times during the call. The first time when Walter picked up. The second time when Walter said, "David?" "Yes, of course." "David Cole. The David who did the Fenway project?" "You mean my friend David?" The third time when Ethan said, "I'm his son." Walter talked to Ethan for 14 minutes. I could hear Walter's voice on the other end of the line. Walter's voice was the voice of a 73-year-old man who had spent his life trying to do the right thing. Walter said, "Your father is the most honorable man I have ever worked with in 50 years of commercial real estate. Your father did that project for free because he believed in the school. Your father did that project for free because he believed in you before he even knew for sure you would go there. Your father did that project for free because that is who he is. Your father did that project for free and never told anyone. Including me. He told me to keep it quiet at the time. He said, 'Walter, this is between me and the future students.'" That is a direct quote. Walter said other things. Walter said, "I have worked with a lot of developers who wanted credit. Your father was the only one in my career who asked me not to give him any." Walter said, "He didn't even want the public commendation. I had to insist on the resolution personally." Walter said, "Your father has a way of doing the right thing in the dark, and that is a very rare quality in our profession." Ethan hung up. He put the phone down on the couch. He didn't say anything for a full minute. He stared at the wall. He read the resolution a 5th time. Then he looked at me and he said, "Dad. I'm sorry." I said, "You don't have to apologize." He said, "I do." I said, "Why?" He said, "Because Mom told me you were a failure. She told me that for years. She told me that when I was 16. She told me that all through high school. She told me that when I was applying to colleges. She told me that when I was at BU. She sent me texts about you. She sent me emails. She told me you were going to lose the business. She told me we were going to lose the house. She told me I shouldn't trust you with anything. And I believed it. I believed it because she was my mother. I believed it because I was tired of you not being at my basketball games. I believed it because I was tired of you being at your desk instead of at my dinner. I believed it because I was tired of waiting. And I am sorry, Dad. I am sorry I didn't wait for the truth." I walked over to him. I put my arms around him. I held him. I held him the way his grandfather had held him on the day he was born. I held him the way a man holds a son when the man has been waiting 14 months to hold him. I held him for a long time. I held him for so long that Marlene's car pulled into the driveway while I was still holding him. We heard the car door. We heard Marlene's keys. We heard the front door open. She walked in carrying 2 paper bags. She said, "I'm back." "Did you boys?" She stopped. She saw Ethan in my arms. She saw the look on Ethan's face. She saw the wall for the first time. She set the bags down on the kitchen floor. She said, "What is that?" I said, "Marlene, that is the truth." She said, "What does that mean?" I said, "It means Ethan knows." She said, "Knows what?" She was still holding her keys in her hand. The keys were dangling from her index finger. The keys had our house key, her car key, a keychain from a trip to Greece in 2018. I said, "Ethan knows about the BU project. Ethan knows about the resolution. Ethan knows I did it for free. Ethan knows the public record. Ethan knows everything." Ethan called Walter Chasen. Walter confirmed it. Walter is in Florida. Walter told your son what kind of man his father is. You can call Walter. Walter will tell you the same thing. Walter will tell you that he will tell it in court if he has to. Marlene stood very still. Her keys were still in her hand. Her keys were swinging slightly. She said, "David, I don't know what you talked him into believing. This family doesn't air its problems." She said this to me, but she was looking at Ethan. Ethan was looking back at her. He said, "Mom." She said, "What?" He said, "I just called a man who worked with my father for 2 years. I just called a man who signed a public document. I just called a man who told me that my father did the biggest project of his career for free, behind your back, before I even applied, because he believed in my school. I just called a man who said my father is the most honorable man he has ever worked with. Mom. I am standing in our living room. I am looking at the resolution. I am looking at the signatures. I am looking at the seal. The seal is real, Mom. The wall is real. The seal is real." She put her keys down on the kitchen counter. She put them down very slowly. She didn't say anything for 11 seconds. Then she said, "I want to see a lawyer." I said, "You can see a lawyer." She said, "I want to see a lawyer this week." I said, "I have a list." She said, "I want to see a lawyer about custody of Ethan." I said, "Ethan is 22. The custody conversation is no longer ours to have. It is Ethan's." She turned to Ethan. She said, "Ethan, you need to come home with me tonight." He said, "Mom, I am home. I am in my home. I am staying in my home. I am staying in the house my father paid for. I am staying for dinner. I am staying for the night. I will see you next week. I will see you when you are ready to tell me the truth. I love you, Mom. But I am not going with you right now." She left. She took her keys. She took her pocketbook. She left the 2 bags of groceries on the floor of the kitchen. She didn't close the front door all the way. I closed it. I locked it. I locked it because the house was mine. Because the name on the deed was mine. Because the home I had built for my son had just been returned to my son. Because the wall I had built had done its work. Because the wall I had built had not needed to speak loudly. The wall did not need to shout. The wall only needed to be true. Ethan and I sat at the kitchen island that night. We didn't talk much. We ate the groceries Marlene had left. We made sandwiches. We ate in silence. We drank water out of glasses that had our last name on them, Cole, in small black letters, in a font our son had picked out at a pottery store in 7th grade. We drank out of those glasses. We looked at each other across the island. We did not need to say anything else. The wall had said it. The seal had said it. The signature had said it. The truth had said it. Around midnight, Ethan went upstairs to his old room. He still had a room in the house. He still had a bed. He still had the posters from high school on the wall, the band posters, the soccer posters, the photo from his 8th grade trip to Washington. He went upstairs. I heard the door close. I sat at the kitchen island. I put my head in my hands. I did not cry. I have never been a man who cries easily. But my hands were wet. I noticed that. I noticed because I notice everything now. The next morning, Ethan came downstairs. He had slept in his old bed. He came into the kitchen. He made coffee. He poured me a cup. He said, "Dad, Mom called me at 6 in the morning." I said, "What did she say?" He said, "She said she's sorry. She said she's been carrying something for a long time. She said she wants to talk to both of us on Sunday." I said, "Okay." He said, "Dad, do you want to talk to her?" I said, "I will talk to her when I see her. I will talk to her on Sunday. I will talk to her in this kitchen. I will talk to her with the wall behind me." He said, "Okay, Dad." He went to his laptop. He opened it. He pulled up the Boston University website. He pulled up the Board of Directors Public Archive. He found the resolution. He read it on his laptop. He read it on his phone. He read it in the document on the wall. He looked at me. He said, "You did this when I was in high school." I said, "Yes." He said, "How?" I said, "I had help. I had a man named Roy. I had a folder. I had a year of planning. I had a frame. I had Armando. I had the wall." He said, "That's a lot." I said, "That's what it takes sometimes. That's what it takes to be a quiet father in a loud family." He said, "Dad, I'm going to call Mom this afternoon. I'm going to tell her I want to come home more often. I'm going to tell her I want to come home for Thanksgiving. I'm going to tell her I want to come home for Christmas. I'm going to tell her I want to come home for spring break. I'm going to tell her I am coming home because of the wall. I am coming home because the wall was true." I said, "Good." He called her. He called her at 2 in the afternoon. He called her on the landline in the kitchen, not on his cell, because he wanted it to feel real. He wanted it to feel like the house. He wanted his mother to hear the kitchen clock ticking behind him. He wanted her to know he was home. He picked up the receiver. He dialed. She picked up on the second ring. He said, "Mom." She said, "Ethan." He said, "Mom, I love you. But I need to tell you something. The wall was real. The wall was true. And I am home now." I stood at the kitchen counter. I listened. I didn't say a word. I let the kitchen clock tick. I let my son speak to his mother. I let the truth move from my hands back into the house where it belonged. The conversation lasted 9 minutes. I counted. I always count. I counted because I am a man who reads contracts for a living. I counted because every minute of every conversation in our family had been counted by someone, somewhere, on a legal pad in a soft blue pen. I counted because counting was how I held the world steady. Marlene came home on Sunday afternoon at 3 o'clock. She drove alone. She came into the house. She did not go to the kitchen. She went to the living room. She stood in front of the wall. She read it. She read it slowly. She put her hand on the frame. She put her forehead against the glass. She stood there for 2 minutes. Then she walked into the kitchen. She said to me, "I'm sorry." She said it twice. She said, "I'm sorry." She said, "David, I'm sorry." She said, "David, I know what I did." She said, "David, I was wrong. And I'm going to get help. And I'm going to tell Ethan what I did. And I'm going to tell Gail what I did. And I'm going to tell Dr. Harmon what I did. And I'm going to do it on my own. And I am not going to ask you for forgiveness tonight. I am going to ask for it eventually. But I am not going to ask for it tonight. Tonight I am going to ask for permission to stay in our house. Tonight I am going to ask if I can sit at the kitchen table with my son one more time. I said, "Marlene, sit down." She sat down. Ethan was there. We sat. The three of us. The kitchen clock ticked. The wall was behind us. The seal was real. The resolution was real. The coffee was black. The coffee was true. The coffee was the truth you can drink. The truth you can hold. The truth you can sit with. I am not a man who gets everything right. I missed Ethan. I missed his games. I missed his prom. I missed his graduation. I missed the chair I was supposed to sit in. I will never get those chairs back. I do not ask to get them back. I do not believe I can get them back. I do not believe the universe gives back chairs to men who miss them. I believe the universe gives back walls. I believe the universe gives back a quiet Saturday in May when a man can stand in his own living room with a university seal above his fireplace, with a son who flew home to read it, with a wife who is sitting in the chair she lied about being allowed to sit in, with a coffee that is black and quiet and real. That is what I have. That is what I was given back. That is what I had to wait 14 months to be given. That is the wall. The frame is still there. The frame is still above the fireplace. The frame is still in the living room. Sometimes Marlene walks past it. She doesn't say anything. Sometimes Ethan calls me on a Sunday morning from Boston. He says, "Hey, Dad." I say, "Hey, Ethan." He says, "How's the wall?" I say, "The wall is the wall. The wall is doing what walls do." He says, "Good. The wall is doing what walls do." That is my story. That is my wall. That is my wife, my son, my name, my hand, my decision, my weight, my silence, my truth, my hold, my frame, my seal, my resolution, my signature, my breath. The call lasted 9 seconds. 9 seconds for my son to end a lie he'd spent 3 years being told. The wall lasted a lifetime. I will take both. 6 months later, Ethan came home for Thanksgiving. He came home on a Wednesday. He flew into Newark. Marlene and I picked him up together this time. We picked him up together because Ethan had asked for it. Ethan had emailed us both a week before and said, "Mom, Dad, I want us to come to the airport together. I want us to be in the car together. I want to walk back into the house with both of you." Marlene and I read the email at the kitchen island. Marlene's jaw tightened. I nodded. We agreed because agreeing was the only way forward. We agreed because Ethan had earned the right to ask for the things he asked for. The email was 12 sentences long. The email was the kind of email a man writes when the man has stopped tolerating ambiguity and has started designing the next chapter. Marlene and I drove to Newark together on a Wednesday morning in late November. The temperature was 41 degrees. The radio was on. We did not talk for the first 20 minutes. Marlene had her coffee in the cup holder. Marlene's coffee had cream and 2 sugars. Marlene's coffee was the same coffee she had been drinking since 2003. The cup had a small chip on the rim from when she had dropped it in the sink in 2014. The chip had been there for 11 years. I noticed the chip because I notice everything now. The chip was a piece of our marriage that had not changed. The chip was a piece of our marriage that would not change. The chip was still, despite everything, holding. After 22 minutes, Marlene turned to me. She said, "David, I want to say something to you and I want you not to respond until I am finished." I said, "Okay." She said, "I have not been kind to you in the last 4 years. I have been unkind to you because I was afraid. Not afraid of you. Afraid of the version of myself that has to admit she lied about the man who paid for the house. Afraid of the version of myself that has to ask Gail for money back that I spent on a lawyer I never actually hired. Afraid of the version of myself that has to look Ethan in the eye at 25 and tell him that the story she told him at 17 was wrong. I have been more afraid of that than I was the night before we got married. I have been more afraid of that than I was the night before Ethan was born. I have been living in a house where I am afraid every single day, and the man whose house it is has been the one person in this house who never raised his voice to me, and I do not deserve that, and I know I do not deserve that, and I am telling you this in a car on the way to pick up our son because that is the only honest place left." I did not respond. She had asked me not to respond. I did not respond because she had never, in 22 years, said anything like this to me. I did not respond because sometimes the most important thing a man can do is drive. I drove the speed limit. Both hands on the wheel. Eyes forward. The way I always drive. She said, "Okay. We can pull over if you want." I said, "We don't have to pull over. We can keep going." She said, "Okay." We parked at the pickup lane. We waited. Ethan came out. He had a backpack over one shoulder. He had a suitcase in his other hand. He saw us both. He walked over. He hugged me first. He hugged me first. I had not been hugged first by my son in 3.5 years. I held him. I held him the way a man holds a son when the son has decided, on his own, that the man has earned the first hug. He let go. He hugged Marlene. He put his arms around Marlene's back this time because he had decided that his mother had earned a real hug. Marlene's hand came up to the back of Ethan's head. Her hand stayed there for 3 full seconds. Her hand stayed on the back of our son's head, in the pickup lane of Newark Airport, in November, at 41 degrees, on a Wednesday. We walked to the car. I opened the trunk. Ethan put his suitcase in. Marlene carried his backpack. I drove. The way I always drive. Ethan was in the back this time. Marlene was in the passenger seat. The same configuration as the August drive to BU. Marlene put her hand on the seat between us. She did not reach for my hand. She put her hand on the seat. I noticed that. The seat was cream leather. There would be a handprint on that seat later. I would not wipe it. We got home. The maple tree was bare now. We walked in. Ethan walked past the wall. He paused at the wall. He took a photo of it with his phone. He sent the photo to me. The photo showed the wall. The photo showed the seal. The photo showed, in the upper right corner, a small piece of dust on the glass that Marlene had not cleaned. I had not cleaned it either. The dust had been there since October. The dust was its own kind of wall. Marlene walked in second. Marlene made 3 cups of coffee. Marlene put one in front of me. Marlene put one in front of Ethan. Marlene took the third. She said, "Sit down." We sat. We sat the way we had sat in May, except on a Wednesday in November, in different light, with different coffee, with people who were not the same people they had been 6 months earlier. Ethan said, "I want to tell you both something." Marlene said, "Okay." I said, "Okay." Ethan said, "I have been working on a project at BU. The project is a podcast. The podcast is about fathers who do things their children do not know about. The podcast is 15 minutes long. The podcast has a working title. The working title is The Wall. I want to feature Dad in episode 1. I want to interview him. I want to interview Walter Chasen. I want to interview Armando Pelosi. I want to tell the story. I want to tell the story the way it happened. Marlene said, Ethan. He said, Mom. She said, you understand I am in this story. He said, I know. She said, you understand I will not be the good guy. He said, I know you won't. She said, and you want to tell the story anyway. He said, Mom, the story is already told. The wall told it. The seal told it. The signature told it. The Walter call told it. I am not making the story up. I am just putting it into the world. She said, what if I do not want you to put it into the world? He said, then I won't. But there are fathers out there who do things quietly. There are sons out there who have been told the wrong thing about their fathers. There are wives out there who have been lied to by their own sisters about their husbands. The story has been, every day, getting bigger, and I want to give it somewhere to land. Marlene sat very still. Marlene did not say anything for 33 seconds. I counted. I always count. Then Marlene said, when are you recording? Ethan said, I was hoping over Thanksgiving break. Marlene said, does this have to happen now? Ethan said, Mom, it's been 6 months. The story hasn't gotten smaller. The story has gotten larger. The wall hasn't moved. The frame hasn't moved. The story will keep getting bigger until you decide to be in it or until you decide to let it pass you by. Marlene said, okay. I will be in it. I will be in the podcast. I will tell the truth. I will tell the truth about Gail. I will tell the truth about Dr. Harmon. I will tell the truth about the savings account. I will tell the truth because the wall told me, 6 months ago, that the truth is more powerful than I am. And I am tired of being less powerful than the wall in my own house. I put my hand on Marlene's hand. I put my hand on her hand for the first time in 7 months. Her hand was cold. I held her hand. I held her hand at the kitchen island. I held her hand the way I had held her hand on the day Ethan was born. I held her hand and the kitchen clock ticked and the wall was in the next room and the seal was real and the resolution was real and the coffee was cold. That was the Thanksgiving. That was the second turning point. The first turning point was the Friday in May. The second turning point was the Wednesday in November. The first turning point was about Ethan. The second turning point was about Marlene. The first turning point had been a wall. The second turning point had been a hand. Ethan recorded the podcast over the long weekend. He recorded it in the living room, in front of the wall. He set up a small microphone on a stand he had borrowed from the BU journalism department. He recorded me first. He asked how I had felt the day I had given the check to Armando. He asked how I had felt the day I had first seen the document on the wall. He asked how I had felt the day my son had called me to ask if it was true that his mother had told him I was a thief. He asked what I had for breakfast on the day I had driven to BU to see my son and he had texted me back to say he was busy. I answered every question. The answers had been in me for 14 months. The answers had been waiting for a son to ask. The answers were waiting for the kind of son who knows how to ask. He recorded Walter Chasen the following week. Walter called from Florida. Walter was wearing a polo shirt. Walter had retired to a house in Naples. Walter talked for 48 minutes. Walter talked about the day I had first met him. Walter talked about the lunch at the Four Seasons. Walter talked about the moment when I had said, there is no fee. Walter talked about the wooden box I had given to each of the 17 families who had sold their parcels. Walter told him that I had paid for the box out of my own pocket because Walter had said at the time, David, you don't have to do that, and I had said, Walter, those people are giving up their homes for my son's school. The least I can do is give them a box. He recorded Armando the following weekend. Armando came to the house on a Saturday. Armando had on the same brown jacket. Armando had not aged visibly in 15 years. Armando did not have much to say because Armando frames things and the framed things speak for themselves. Armando said, "Mr. Cole is a man who repairs things and does not tell anyone." Armando said that. Armando said that into the microphone. I sat in the kitchen listening to Armando walk past me on his way out. Armando stopped at the wall for 2 seconds. He did not say anything. Moral men do not interpret. Moral men frame. Roy declined the interview. He sent back an email through Ethan. The email said, "Mr. Cole, the work speaks for itself. The work has been done. There is nothing for me to add." Marlene was recorded on the Sunday before Ethan flew back to Boston. Marlene was recorded in the kitchen. Marlene sat at the island. Marlene had on a beige sweater. Marlene's sweater was the same beige sweater she had on the night she had told Ethan about the university at the plaza 15 years earlier. Marlene had a glass of water in front of her. Marlene said, "My name is Marlene Cole. I have been married to David Cole for 22 years. I have one son. I have done some things in this marriage that I am not proud of. I have worked with my sister to tell my son a story about his father. The story was not true. The story was made to convince my son that his father was a small man. The story was made with the deliberate intent of making my son believe that his father was not the man his father actually is. I did this because I was afraid of what would happen if my son ever stood in front of the truth. I was right to be afraid. The truth is the seal. The truth is the resolution. The truth is a man who quietly went to work for his son's school for 2 years for free because he loved his son before he even knew his son would attend. The truth is a man who I do not deserve yet, and may never deserve, but who has never once raised his voice to me. The truth is in this kitchen. The truth is on the wall. The truth is the way David held my hand last week before our son left. The truth is going to be, for the rest of my life, harder than I am. I accept that. The podcast episode is 52 minutes long. It was released on the first Sunday of December, on Ethan's 23rd birthday weekend, because Ethan wanted the world to hear his father's voice on the day he turned 23. I am not a man who talks a lot. I am not a man who has ever sought out the spotlight. But my son wanted it. My son wanted it because my son had been taken from me by a story, and the only way my son knew to give me back was to replace that story with this one. The story that the documents tell. The story that the seal tells. The story that a quiet father tells in the dark. The frame is still in the living room. The room has the coffee this morning. The room has Marlene passing through on her way to her car. The room has Ethan's voice on the phone on Sunday mornings. The room has Walter's voice on the recording. The room has Marlene's voice on the recording. The room has the truth on the wall. The room is different because the truth changed the room. I am not a man who gets every chair right. I missed the chair at the basketball game. I missed the chair at the junior prom. I missed the chair at the senior prom. I missed the chair at the graduation. I missed the chair at the dentist appointment. I missed the chair at the school play. I cannot recover those chairs. The chairs are a loss I have to carry. But the wall is not lost. The wall is the answer. The wall is not a church. The wall is not a courtroom. The wall is not a sermon. The wall is the answer to the question my son asked me on a Friday afternoon in May on a phone in an airport. The wall is the answer to the question he had been asking, in his own way, for 3.5 years. The wall is the answer to the question his mother had been planting in him. The wall is the answer to the question his sister had been planting in him. The wall is the answer to the question his therapist had been unwilling to counter in yellow legal pads and a soft blue pen in an office above a nail salon named Lola's in West Orange, New Jersey. The wall is the answer. The frame is still above the fireplace. The wall has done what walls do. The wall has held something up. The wall has held up the truth in front of a son. The wall has held up the truth in front of a wife. The wall has held up the truth in front of a family that had been told a story by a man who loved his son and had not been loved back. I am David Cole. I am 51 years old. I run a commercial real estate firm in Midtown Manhattan that I built from nothing. The firm's name is on a brass plaque outside a 62nd floor office on 6th Avenue. The firm has 41 employees. The firm's portfolio includes 8 buildings in 3 states. These things have not changed. These things will be true next year and the year after that and the year after that. But there is a wall above the fireplace in my living room now. The wall has, on it, a single framed public document from the Board of Directors of Boston University. The wall has, on it, the seal of the university. The wall has, on it, the signatures of 4 men I have worked with and trusted and never gone back on. The wall has, on it, a paragraph that 4 men insisted on writing because they wanted the world to know who I am, in the dark, for my son. The wall is not the building. The wall is not the portfolio. The wall is not the firm. The wall is not the brass plaque. The wall is, in fact, the only thing in my house that does not have my name on it. The wall is the only thing my wife cannot sell. The wall is the only thing my son cannot unknow. The wall is the only thing my sister's voice cannot dismiss. The wall is the only thing my wife's therapist cannot overwrite. The wall is the only thing that has ever been put above the fireplace in this house. The wall is mine. The wall is my son's. The wall is my wife's. The wall is ours. The wall will be there tomorrow. The wall will be there when I come home from work today. The wall will be there when Ethan calls on Sunday morning. The wall will be there when Armando comes back for the 10-year inspection of the glass. The wall will be there when Marlene walks past it on her way to the kitchen in the morning. The wall is the truth. The wall is what the truth becomes when a man cannot say it out loud and a son needs to hear it. The wall is what a quiet father's love becomes when a loud wife's lie is bigger than the love was. The wall is what a man builds when he has spent his life signing documents for other people and has finally decided to sign one for his son. The wall is the document. The wall is the signature. The wall is the seal. The wall is the mahogany. The wall is the museum-grade glass. The wall is Armando's work. The wall is the $8,000 I did not hesitate to write. The wall is the decision. The wall is the waiting. The wall is the airport. The wall is the hug. The wall is the back of Marlene's head. The wall is the kitchen. The wall is the Sunday morning call. The wall is all of that. The wall is the only monument a quiet man will ever get. A quiet man does not get a statue in a park. A quiet man does not get a plaque at a stadium. A quiet man does not get a day named after him. A quiet man gets a wall. A quiet man gets a frame. A quiet man gets a signature on a document that hangs in his living room, where his son can read it when his son comes home from college, where his wife can read it when his wife decides to tell the truth. The wall lasted 14 months. The wall lasted 6 months more. The wall will last, in this house, for the rest of my life. The wall will last past me. The wall will last into Ethan's children. The wall will last through whatever Marlene and I become. The wall will last because the wood is real. The wall will last because the glass is real. The wall will last because the seal is real. The wall will last because the resolution is real. The wall will last because a public document cannot be unmade. The call lasted 9 seconds. The wall lasted a lifetime. I will take both.